Today on CityCast Philly, it's the Friday News Roundup. We're talking about how the sheriff's office used a secret slush fund to buy ammunition, tasers, and a $9,000 mascot costume. And the NBA admits to errors from the refs in the first two games of the playoffs between the Sixers and the Knicks. It's Friday, April 26th. I'm Trinae Nuri, and here's what Philly's talking about. Joining me this week is Bill Bender, investigative reporter at the Philadelphia Inquirer. Hey, Bill.
Hey, thanks for having me.
Yeah. And OJ Spivey, sports writer at the Philadelphia Tribune. Hey, OJ.
Hi, Trinae. Always great to be on with you.
Before we get into the news of the week, for this week's icebreaker, the most Philly thing I saw this week had to be from an article in the Philadelphia Inquirer looking into how people say the South Philly street and neighborhood, spelled PASS-YUNK. So I say it like PASS-YUNK. I pronounce the Y as an E sound. But how do y'all say it?
I don't know. I just say PASH-YUNK, but maybe I'm saying it wrong. I'm not sure.
Okay, so you're saying it with like a sh in the middle. Okay,
Yeah, an
interesting.
SH that actually isn't there. That's how I say it.
OJ, you're from Philly. Tell me, how do we say this neighborhood?
Well, first thing is, and I always think of the street, as opposed to the neighborhood, but being a lifelong Philadelphian, I'm from West Philly. And it's funny because when I went through broadcast school, we had a radio class, we had a traffic class. We were taught to say PASH-YUNK, not the SH as Bill says, and which is easy to say because I'm guilty of it as well. But we're taught to say PASS-YUNK as a compound word. But growing up, I always said PASS-YUNK.
Mm-hmm.
And, I get caught up in just saying Manny-YUNK. I say Manny-YUNK because I've always been here.
How
But
else are you supposed to say Manny-YUNK?
I think it's Manny-YUNK. Yeah, exactly. So
Manny-YUNK. Yeah. I've never heard anyone say it differently. I don't know. All right, let's get into some of the news of the week. Bill, you and your colleague Ryan Briggs looked into some recent spending happening within the sheriff's office. Y'all found that there's been hundreds of off-budget purchases from a checking account the Philadelphia Sheriff's Department has access to. How did this all come about? Like, how did y'all even start to look into this?
Well, the finances in the sheriff's office have been questionable going back a long time. And we were just trying to get a handle on how exactly they have been spending money recently. So basically, it's kind of similar to if you had a police department that was writing speeding tickets and all this money is coming in through people paying the speeding tickets. And then when it came time to decide how to spend it, it would be the police chief and him, and their staff just writing the checks. That's kind of similar to what's happening over in the sheriff's office. The money's supposed to be turned over to the city is basically how it's supposed to work.
So essentially, this is public money.
Yeah, it's definitely public money. The sheriff's office has argued that it's not tax dollars, which it's not, but this is public money. You figure any government brings in money through tax revenue and then fees or fines. That they're like just a couple of different revenue streams, and this would just be the latter. So it's definitely public money. It should be going into the main general fund, at least according to the home rule charter and the law department.
Okay, so like you just mentioned, money was coming in. Where was this money coming from?
Different services that they do, like evictions or sheriff sales and other functions of the office. So they're just kind of relatively small fees that add up just due to volume, just to the number of transactions there are. But it adds up to millions of dollars over time.
Okay, so can you give us some examples of the purchases made with this money?
A lot of the purchases were things that you'd see from small police departments, such as ammunition or training, canine veterinarian bills, things like that. But then there were all these kind of smaller but numerous expenses that were kind of uncommon. Like they spent about $9,000 on a mascot costume. There were, DJ expenses, catering, Chickies and Pete's, a lot of things that were not typically what you would see in the operational expenses of a sheriff's department.
A $9,000 mascot costume. Like, what would the department need that for?
Their explanation was that it is to, part of community outreach and building morale and connecting with children. And it's not necessarily a terrible idea. I mean, a lot of police departments do various types of community outreach. It seemed kind of expensive for a mascot costume, but at the same time, the issue for us wasn't so much what they're spending the money on. It's just that the money's supposed to be turned over to the city is basically how it's supposed to work. And what we were trying to focus on is just kind of the unique process here and just keeping the money and spending it themselves. Then once we started looking at what it's spent on, there were obviously a couple questionable expenditures in there.
What was surprising to me is that in your reporting, you say Philadelphia Sheriff Rochelle Bilal describes her office as dangerously underfunded to a point that she's unable to buy needed supplies for her deputies. So has the sheriff's office responded to this story at all?
They did respond and they said that, kind of explaining that they do community outreach and, boosting morale, and they don't have enough money and that this money couldn't be used specifically to hire people. It's just kind of a separate pool of money. But no one, either in the sheriff's office or city hall, no one has explained or responded just to the concept of keeping the money. Like that's kind of what I really wanted to focus on with the story is just why isn't the money being turned over to the government? At a budget hearing last week, the undersheriff said at city council that they have state authority to do this. So I looked into that, and the state hadn't heard of that. The city controller said that that's not correct. The law department says that the money should be turned over. So I'm not sure what exactly they're referring to, but they seem to believe that there's some type of provision that gives them the authority to keep the money and spend it directly.
More news of the week after the break. Just kind of like a bigger picture question here. Why should this matter to like everyday Philadelphians? If they're saying they could do whatever they can with the money, why should it matter to us?
I think just because it's public money, basically, and it adds up to a lot of money over time. I mean, I read a lot about government accountability and, different departments. And usually the place to start is just how money is being spent. And to me, it seemed like one of these Philly situations where there's like a simple fix to a problem, but no one in government wants to own the problem. And that's kind of really all there was to it for us.
Bill, there's been some talk of, okay, can the city or should the city abolish the sheriff's office because of all the issues that has happened and not just Bilal, but, you know, a few regimes before that. So have you had any like information on that, or have you talked to people who really feel that the office should be abolished?
Yeah, that keeps coming up, and we have looked into it. I think the city council could pass legislation, and then it would have to go to a ballot question. So they could abolish the office. They could also change just the way it works. Like my understanding is they could address this specific thing, for example. It seems like too much of a hassle from what I could tell. I mean, the mayor's office wouldn't even discuss it with me in any aspect. And there's a little bit of a complication here with the sheriff's office being independently elected, where I think no one in City Hall just kind of wants to maybe use the political capital that would be required to fix a problem in another department with another elected official.
Interesting. Thank you.
You can read more on Bill's reporting by clicking the link in our show notes. OJ, sports fans know that, you win some, you lose some. But this week was controversial because the Sixers filed a grievance with the National Basketball Association over several errors made by officials during the first two games against the New York Knicks during the first round of the playoffs. OJ, last night was game 3 between the two teams, but can you just remind us what happened in the first 2 games of this series that caused some, frustration, especially from the Sixers head coach Nick Nurse and Joel Embiid?
Well, Trinae, there was a lot of discourse and a lot of frustration from the Sixers standpoint, and it's the reason why they filed a grievance with the NBA. They just weren't happy with the officiating, and specifically at the end of Game 2, we all saw that debacle. Sixers had a 5-point lead with about 40 seconds to go. There's a couple of turnovers, inbounds pass. It appeared that Maxey got fouled a couple of times. And that's partly why they filed a grievance. And then the NBA came back and said that, yeah, they missed a couple calls. Actually, not only did Tyrese Maxey get fouled once, he got fouled twice, and the NBA admitted to it. So it didn't change the outcome. The Sixers were on the short end of the game. But what actually the grievances do is, even though it doesn't change the outcome, it kind of puts the NBA and it kind of puts the officials on notice
Mm-hmm.
saying that, hey, you missed something here. You missed something a couple of times. And there was even a timeout that Nick Nurse tried to call that wasn't recognized. The Sixers had their part in it too. You can't lose a 5-point lead with less than 40 seconds to go. You're supposed to secure that, but the refs didn't help them. Normally what happens is you'll get what's called a pool report at the end of the game when a referee or the lead referee will give a report of what happened
Mm-hmm.
in the last 2 minutes or what happened in a critical part of the game and explain that. The Sixers did not file that request in time in order to get that. But again, just the moral of just filing a grievance is, you want to lobby for fairness, when the basketball games are officiated. And hopefully, as we see the series progress, that you'll see more fairness on both sides of the ball.
Now, OJ, in a basketball game, a coach can challenge a call, right? So was that not an option in this particular case?
No, not really, because coaches get 2 challenges per game, and you do have to win your first challenge to kind of hold, your next 2 challenges. And my understanding is that Nick Nurse did challenge a couple of calls before that,
Mm-hmm.
and one that he lost, I believe. So that wasn't an option at that point. You could make a case that, okay, once the Knicks scored and went ahead, that you call a timeout immediately. You don't wait for the inbounds pass. Knicks played good defense. Of course, they grabbed Maxey a couple of times, but you could make the case that Knicks should have called the timeout earlier as soon as the Knicks took the lead, because that's possible as well. But also, too, he could have challenged those calls or those non-calls, so to speak, if he had that available to him.
Interesting. Now, we're all humans and we all make mistakes, but this was a huge mistake. How are Sixers fans feeling about this?
Yeah, well, there's always some sort of, whether that's sports wise, whether it's socially, whether it's population wise, there's always been some sort of rivalry between New Yorkers and Philadelphians.
Mm-hmm.
And, Philadelphians being the small town or stuck in between DC and New York. But there's always been some type of rivalry there. So you want to go against the big bag New Yorkers, but, you just don't want to have a sense that you're being robbed of a chance to compete, and even so, a chance to win the game. So that's where the discourse comes, and that's where everybody's upset.
Well, we'll still be rooting for our guys. All right, that was OJ Spivey, sports writer at the Philadelphia Tribune, and also Bill Bender, investigative reporter at the Philadelphia Inquirer. Thank you both so much for joining me this week on the Friday News Roundup.
Thank you, Trinae. Always great to be on.
Yeah, thanks a lot.
It's time for the tip of the week, where we share a life hack for living in Philly. If you sent a mail-in or absentee ballot for this week's primary election, check to see if your name is on the list of errors. According to Billy Penn, city commissioners can't verify the IDs for more than 230 mail-in voters. You have until Monday, April 29th, to submit a photocopy or picture of your ID to phillyelections@phila.gov or fax copies to 215-686-3636. 3398. We'll have a link to this information in our show notes. If you have a tip of the week, we'd love to hear from you too. Call or text us at 215-259-8170. That's all for today here on CityCast Philly. Our executive producer is Laura Benchoff. Our producer is Abby Fritz. Our Hey Philly newsletter editors are Asha Prahar and Adrian Gonzalez. And our host is me, Trinae Nuri. Music is by Philly's own Interminable, with additional music from All the Kimonos and James Weldon. If you enjoyed this week of episodes, please tell a friend, rate the show, leave us a review, and subscribe to our morning newsletter, Hey Philly. We'll be back Monday morning with more news from around the city. Have a great weekend and be safe, y'all. Bye.